News stories about arrests and legal issues are different from the other sorts of articles that you'll read in the British sports media. They're often incredibly short and conspicuously light on detail. And this can be confusing. Because of, quote, legal reasons, a frustratingly vague explanation which we will attempt to explain in far more detail later on, these news stories also never include the opportunity to leave a comment. Why is that? Well, the reality of football is that it's very difficult for anything to remain confidential, particularly in the era of social media. But there are laws on what can and cannot be reported. These laws can perhaps seem anachronistic, but it's essential that responsible publishers, like The Athletic, abide by them. Why does The Athletic not name arrested players? We never decide not to name an arrested person. We are legally not able to. In the United Kingdom, arrested suspects have the right to privacy until the police see fit to charge them. That is because being charged is the point in the legal process when the courts have decided there is enough substance to the allegations to warrant linking someone to them. Before that, the courts consider that there is no public interest in knowing what someone is being investigated for or has been arrested over. This is different to how rules work in the United States, which can sometimes confuse people. And we will come onto that in a little more detail later. So when do you name them? Well, when it's legally permissible for us to do so. That's usually when the individual has been charged. On rare occasions, it's legally okay to name someone before they are charged, for example, if they themselves have spoken out about the situation or if their arrest was highly public. But otherwise, naming an individual before they are charged is legally and ethically irresponsible. Why have I seen a name repeatedly mentioned on social media or in other publications? Well, let's start with social media. You don't have to spend long on social media to find people speculating over which individual may or may not have been arrested. But anybody who names an individual in relation to a criminal investigation risks breaking the law. Individuals who are being investigated or who have been arrested almost always have a right to privacy up until the moment that they are charged with an offence. And this doesn't only apply to media organisations. Social media users can also be sued for breaches of privacy, although identifying the person behind the profile is often far more difficult than holding a media company to account. Different publications may handle stories differently for different reasons, the most common being that they are located in a different jurisdiction and so are bound by completely different laws. Why do you provide some details but not others? So when we're not allowed to identify someone for legal reasons, we take great care not to do so. That applies not just to those who've been arrested, it also applies to victims of sexual offences, for example, as well as children involved in court cases. In these instances, we do all that we can to try to protect that right to anonymity. But there are still some general non-identifying details that we can responsibly reveal without identifying someone. Unhelpfully, there is no list of what is and what is not allowed, which explains why rival news organisations covering the same story can end up with subtly different reports with different details. That's why a 26-year-old Premier League footballer arrested in Birmingham on suspicion of sexual assault, to use a purely hypothetical example, might be described as a footballer in his mid-20s arrested in the Midlands. Otherwise, our reporting could result in not just an invasion of the arrested player's privacy, but also in potentially libelous speculation around all other 26-year-old Premier League footballers who frequent Birmingham, which would likely be a fairly small number. Why do you turn comments off? Now, this is one of the most commonly asked questions on social media when we publish a story that does not offer our subscribers the opportunity to comment. And there are a few different reasons. As a responsible publisher, we will always turn comments off on stories where what we can report is restricted out of respect to the individuals involved. We will also turn comments off in stories that involve a live legal trial. This is because commenters may inadvertently identify people that they shouldn't. Or they might comment about whether or not someone facing a trial is guilty, which would be a breach of the UK's contempt laws, potentially jeopardising a trial through the publication of prejudicial information. At its most serious, contempt can even lead to an entire trial collapsing. Why is your US coverage often so different from your reporting on the UK football? Now, that's a very good question, At The Athletic, we are fortunate to have a truly international audience, with our readership often split evenly between the UK and the US. But libel, privacy and contempt of court rules are all very different in the US to the UK. That often means that stories that we publish in the UK that involve the UK legal system are subject to different legal rules. The clearest example of that is the coverage of arrests. In the US, arrests are a matter of public record. This means that individuals can be identified from the moment that they are arrested. As already explained in more detail, that is not the case in the UK. US laws naturally apply to UK citizens when in the country, and vice versa. That's why news stories concerning matters of US law might seem to have far more detail than news stories published in the UK. It's nothing to do with a different set of editorial standards, instead an entirely different legal framework. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Daniel Taylor, Ollie Kay, Amy Lawrence and Rafa Honigstein. There are journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.